Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Molly. I'm a journalism student, junior, with a public relations concentration and a communication studies minor. Welcome to the Spring 2018 edition of our Liberal Arts Talk. This series was established to provide a venue for sharing research completed by liberal arts faculty while on sabbatical leaves. It is a sampling of the diverse work and excellence of our faculty and an opportunity to come together for an hour of intellectual exploration with students, alumni, faculty, staff, retirees, and friends from the community. Today's speaker is Robert Aponte, Associate Professor of Sociology. Dr. Aponte's academic interests include demography, Latino studies, race and ethnicity, and social justice, broadly put. Dr. Aponte earned his bachelor's at George Mason University and master's and PhD from the University of Chicago, the latter in 1991. His work had been published in the International Journal of Sociology and Social Policy and Social Problems and Handbook of Marriage and the Family. He was also the principal author of The Robber to the Governor of Hispanics in Indiana. Today, Dr. Aponte will present 16 Bullets, the Laquan McDonald tragedy and the harsh realities of deadly policing. Malicious shootings of mostly black civilians by police have unleashed public outcry and renewed reform efforts. The seeming immunity enjoyed by the shooters rests strongly on a police code of silence. Laquan McDonald's case, a 17-year-old shot 16 times by a cop, exemplifies the problem and points to solutions. Let's give Dr. Aponte a warm welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Dean Davis. Thanks, Merle, and thanks to Candace and all the others who have worked to provide me with this forum to talk to you about something that is very, very deep, very, very strong. A piece of research that's in my heart, very difficult work to take on. I'd like to first acknowledge very briefly, because I'm going to go long, I'm sure of it. I'm going to have to cut things out along the way, but I want to acknowledge Black Lives Matter, because if it weren't for their courage and sacrifice, the reforms that are now popping would have taken a lot longer to come about. And so I'll always be indebted to them. And when this is finally published, they will receive the first and perhaps the strongest acknowledgement of all. I'd like to also acknowledge my co-collaborator and co-author, Hannah Hurley, who is actually just an undergraduate and has taken on an enormous burden in having to deal with a very absent-minded and disorganized professor. And she's managed to keep a smile on her face the whole time. Problem that I'm discussing tonight is shootings and killings by police of civilians. This is a huge problem. There's so many other problems in this society, problems here, problems that we cause abroad. Many of these problems cost many, many lives. And it's difficult to say, this one is worse than that one, or that one is worse than this one. But I will say this, something like this problem comes so close to home. It's the kind of thing that I've done a lot of other work, but it's seldom that I've done work that I cannot leave behind. When I try to walk away from this, it sticks to you, and it'll stick to you too, I suspect, when you leave here today, because it is gripping. The problem of killings, and let alone shootings that aren't lethal, that don't result in death, to say is huge is an understatement. The numbers are staggering. The numbers are staggering in this issue. And there are numerous reasons. One unmistakable inherent problem, of course, is racism. Racism, which remains very, very strong in society. But it's not just racism. There have been numerous egregious shootings, killings of white people themselves. So it's not just a race problem, but race is a big part of it, and very easy to see the racial angle. One of the problems in doing this work, and they have many problems in trying to do this work, is that it's very difficult to obtain data. There actually was no data until very recently when these shootings started to take off and get a lot of publicity. And it's very clear that one of the reasons that it's gotten the publicity it has recently is because we now have the internet, we have cell phone cameras that can record this stuff. Where if it weren't for that, it would be very difficult to even get a grip on it. The FBI did not have numbers until The Guardian at UK and the Washington Post here in the United States took it upon themselves to painstakingly obtain all the possible killings by police officers in this country. And the data sets go only as far back as 2014. For good estimates, 2013 is a little bit good. 15 and 16 are very good. 17, of course, is in the process of being refined and tabulated, etc. Wow. I use, when I show you my figures, and I'm going to not make this a statistical presentation, but I have to show you at least some data. I use the data from the Washington Post. The Washington Post provides the most conservative estimates. Their criteria for inclusion is the tightest. For example, one of the most famous cases, a guy named Freddie Gray, who died in Baltimore in police custody, would not be considered in the Washington Post data set because he wasn't shot to death. What they did was they threw him in a paddy wagon, they cuffed him, and then they went for a long ride. And they were shaking and bumping, and he's bumping all around. He ended up dying in the hospital about an hour later. Broken spine, you name it. I mean, he'd had it, broken bones, a whole 9 yards. But he's not in the Post data set because he wasn't shot to death. And that's not a criticism, that's just a reality. Different data sets, varying, etc. Man, why? Why do we have these problems? Actually, even before I get to why we have these problems, let me just say that this is hardly something that just started happening just because we didn't know. These problems date way back. The Kerner Commission, 1968, delved into this stuff. What was the Kerner Commission about? It was about the riots in the big cities of the United States in the 1960s, which were all about race, about the mistreatment of African Americans by the police. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Kerner report and the riots of the 1960s. And you know, one thing I've never been crazy about sports, but ever since Colin Kaepernick started this movement, I have gained an enormous respect. And I have to show you that wasn't the first time. There have been protests by sports people going back a half century. And if we could just show you, there you go. 50 years of protests, 50 years. And of course, they did not have the advantage that we have today with regard to being able to amass the numbers. So what are some of the reasons? And the thing is, I could go really, really long, but I don't want to do that because we need the time. But there's such an array of reasons. Unions, police unions, extremely, extremely powerful unions, browbeat mayors, force mayors, really, to do things that the mayors prefer not to do, but they have to do it. And I could give you so many stories about that. Maybe you know about the story of Bill de Blasio in New York City, who displeased the police during a situation regarding some shootings. And so 2 police officers were shot by a man in cold blood. And immediately the right-wing machine, and often aligned with the police, started on de Blasio. And so when de Blasio went to address the police officers about the deaths of 2 of their colleagues, every last one of those cops stood up when de Blasio started speaking and turned their backs on him. That is how strong these unions are and how strongly they feel about protecting their turfs. etc. So it's really a situation, but there's much more. The deference that police receive by not only judges, not only DAs, not only their fellow cops, but even the general public. And I'll point out to one case that exemplifies that. God willing, I have time to get to it. Training. The training in this country so different from the training in other countries. In this country, the training on how to do violence far greater than the training that they get, for example, in de-escalation when there's a situation. Unlike Europe, where it's the opposite. The training on de-escalating situations is far, far more than the training on doing violence. Guns, oh my God, you're not going to believe this one. This is the only nation on the face of the earth where there are more guns than there are people, by about 30%. No nation comes close. I don't remember the pecking order because I got too much going on up here. But I believe the closest was Yemen. Yemen, a war-torn country. And they were at, I think, 78%, meaning the guns, if you add all the guns up, 78% of the Yemenis population. How does that figure into something like this? A number of ways, but one way it figures in is a cop can argue, I expected him to have a gun because everyone's got guns. So of course, it's a lot easier to say, well, I thought he was armed. I thought my life was in danger because he reached, you know how many times they say that the person reaches for the waistband? There's a kid that they killed in Arizona. This kid it's such a terrible case. It's a white kid. He's crawling on the ground because the cop told him, crawl on the ground with me or I'm going to shoot. And the kid, I guess his pants started to come off because he's crawling like cuffed or cuffed without cuffs. In other words, like he's told to put his hands behind his back and he's listening. And so he maybe went down to pull up his pant and they shot him to death. He was crying. He was begging them not to shoot. And they still shot him to death. And it's always, he went for his waist. I thought he went for a gun. Well, when you got a society that's got more guns than people, that is not that crazy of a defense for having shot someone that shouldn't have been shot in the first place. We all know why. One of the reasons why there's so many guns in this society, right? The three letters, N, R, and A. I'm sure you all know the NRA. Well, I'm thinking maybe the NRA should be a different acronym. It should be AWDLW. Association for the widespread distribution of lethal weaponry. That is what the NRA should be called because that is exactly what they do and what they stand for. So that's guns. That's another reason. A Supreme Court decision, 1988. I am sure that it was well intended, but the ramifications were very negative. And that was a decision that said, look, we can't second guess these cops. If it's a split-second decision and they may be in danger. And so we have to judge them by what they perceive. If they really perceive their life is in danger, we have to go along with it. And that has the ramifications of that decision to this day, make this a harder problem than it would otherwise be. Got to give you two quick examples of racism in policing right here in Indianapolis. One goes back 25 years, actually, I show my age here, right? A case in Carmel. Carmel had a reputation for stopping black motorists like it was going out of style, okay? One day, however, they made a big mistake. They stopped an African-American state trooper. Seen his credentials, oh, sorry, sir, have a nice day, and drove off. Little did they know that guy wasn't about to take that sitting down. Anyway, make a long story short, big time lawsuit. Needless to say, In the end, they settled. Carmel would admit no wrongdoing. They never admit wrongdoing, these people. They are slick, let me tell you. But they had to put cameras on every car and record the demographic characteristics of everyone they stopped. The disproportionate stopping of black people plummeted as a result. Okay? And what's worse in some respects is the thing with Mexicans. I don't know how many of you know, but there's Mexicans all over the city. But really, the big influx was in the 1990s. Prior to that, numbers were very low. Okay? A number of them, typically unskilled laborers, were working in Carmel, living in the city, working in Carmel. They were stopped so often that the owner of the factory went to the police and said, hey, look, you gotta stop what you're doing to my people, man. What are you doing? I said, okay, we'll work it out. You know how they worked it out? They put decals in their cars. So when they see a Mexican, if he's got a decal, we don't stop him. What does that tell you? Doesn't have a decal, he gets pulled over. They're very straightforward. But they admitted no wrongdoing. No wrongdoing, of course not. And that's not the only example. One more. And here's the one, 2017. Okay, 2017. You have a young man who apparently was running from the cops in the car, stopped the car. They came up on him. He made some kind of move, typical, oh, he went for a gun, we don't know. Bang, he's dead. Okay? About a week, 2 months later or less, you got a white guy who, I don't know if he was drinking or what, I don't remember. But he crashed his car and he ended up upside down. Okay? The cops came, as they would for any accident. He started shooting at the cops. And he killed a cop. Killed a cop. They took him alive. Now, is that racism? I don't know. Maybe there's special circumstances. He did get shot, mind you, but they still took him alive. That other guy, he went dead. He was dead. So this is not, an isolated. This happens everywhere, all the time, right here in our city. And by the way, our city has improved, in my opinion, over time. I used to get a lot of reports of driving while black. I've gotten very few of them because reforms matter. When people start talking about this stuff and they start agitating, there's typically some kind of response. And that is, in my opinion, it's a good response. However, I will say this about driving while black. A lot of these killings have been motorists who were pulled over. Okay? There's something about being pulled over, and it's typically a bad brake light. Brake light was not functioning. And so they get pulled over and it escalates and boom, we got another dead body. It occurs to me, instead of the expression DWB, driving while black, maybe it should be DWB, WBT, driving while black with bad brake lights. Because you got bad brake lights and you're black and you're driving, you might be in trouble. Be careful. Be careful. That's all I can say about that. I'm sorry if I'm going. This stuff really gets to me. I mean, it's not easy to do this work. It's very very hard. I'm going to skip over some stuff. Let's go next to the next slide. And I want to just tell you briefly that when I started out, I thought I was going to do one paper on Laquan McDonald and cover a bunch of territory. And I got quickly turned around. Thank you, Tom, who made the suggestion. And I jumped right on it. I said, man, don't do it in one paper. You got too much data. As it is, I broke it down to 3. And today, I'm going to, hopefully, if there's time, I'm already almost out of time, try to do code of silence, which is very, very important. And then racism. And now what I will show you is why this one, for example, is epitomized by the Philando Castile case. How many familiar with Philando Castile case? Okay, some of you familiar with that case. And then the blue privilege. I coined a new phrase here. I may end up in Guinness here. And that's epitomized by the Walter Scott case, and I'll show you how that's the case as well. And these overlap. I mean, these could work in any one of the 3 categories, but I'm going to stick primarily with the code, if I can get to it. I'm telling you, it's going to be hard. All right, let me move on to showing the statistics. These are just shootings, and these include killings and non-lethal killings, just again to show you the racial angle. It's so serious. I mean, it's unmistakable. And this was just the top 31 departments, but there's something that comes later from the same data set that's important, and that's instructive. Moving right along. Oh, by the way, we kill about 1,000 a year in this country. Now, these are the Washington Post figures. So the first one just shows the raw numbers of killings. So you got 991 total, 497 white, 259 black, and then 2016 there's actually a drop, and that drop, which is actually important, is reflected in all the data sets. So that's not just the Post. It's just that the numbers are different, but the trend. So we may indeed have turned the corner to some extent on this issue, and I'll show you more figures on that later. But nonetheless, you see, while whites over about twice as much as African Americans, but the population figures make that disproportionate black fatality. And this is the rate of killing. So these are actual rates per million population for the same 2 years. And where you see the white rate is only slightly under 3, black rate 6, almost 0.7, and then both again decline slightly, 2.9, and a bigger decline among African American fatalities. So that's a good one. Let's go to the next one. Often when you want to show how out of kilter something is, it's good to go what we call comparative. In this instance, comparing the United States with other countries. So let's look at that top figure. 1 month in the United States, this is how many people we killed in 1 month. Almost 80, November of 2015. Almost 80 are killed. Germany, 5.5 months, same year. Look at that, about five people killed. And they're complaining. They say, hey man, we're killing too many people here in Germany, they're claiming. UK, look in this UK. From 1920 to 2015, all right, only about 50. Now they're having issues too because of terrorists. And there's a big debate there now. Should we shoot to kill or not? Because they don't shoot to kill. That's another thing I need to remember to talk about that if there's time. Iceland, 70 years from the founding. That's how many people they killed. All right, now, since we have a bigger population than any of these other countries, it's important to show rates, right? We want to show rates. So this is the police killing rates in the US as multiples of the rates in these other countries. So for example, you can see the difference between the US and UK. Our rate is 200 times the rate in the UK, 38 times the rate in Germany, 20 times the rate in France. Denmark, 18 comes the closest, and that's the highest you're going to find. And I don't know what the hell's going on in Denmark, man. I'm going to stay out of Denmark. I used to love Denmark until I saw these figures. Okay. Next is, what is next? I jumped ahead. So what's the outcome of all this stuff? What's the outcome? What typically happens is that police officers are seldom charged. If they are charged, they're acquitted. Rarely they might cop to something like a misdemeanor of some kind. But there's payouts to the families. And these are what the figures look like. Boston, 36 million in 10-year period. Chicago. This isn't all of them. All right. This is what I was able to get my hands on at the time, because it's not easy to math. It's not easy to find this stuff. Believe me, it's very hard. Look at all this money. Chicago is off the charts, and they just had another big 20 million one the other day, like last week or something. Now, none of this is lost completely on people. Ever since the beating in Los Angeles, now I'm blocking the kid, Rodney King. Some of you maybe remember the Rodney King, or you may have heard of it historically, the Rodney King beating. So one of the things that came out of the Rodney King beating was that the federal government implemented this process they call interventions. And so they will actually go into a city and intervene and force In some, it kind of varies, but essentially forced the police department to allow them in, to check practices and provide recommendations, and in some cases they appoint a judge to oversee that the cities in fact comply with this. So these federal interventions, and this is just a, let me have the next slide. This is just a scattering of them. And see, Chicago, that followed Laquan. Laquan blew Chicago into the stratosphere. I mean, Laquan was the biggest thing that happened in Chicago. The Cleveland one is very interesting. Baltimore, you guys talk about Baltimore. Freddie Gray, you hear about the cops that got caught literally stashing, I mean, not stashing, excuse me, putting dope on a suspect in front of his own camera, because what the cop forgot is that the cameras are fixed so that when you turn them on, it actually gives you a recording for about a couple of minutes before you actually turn it on. I don't know how they do that. It's probably on all the time. But anyway, and then it just keeps erasing all the time. But when you turn it on, you actually get some stuff that happened already, plus where you, after whatever comes after you turn it on. The Cleveland thing is amazing. I mean, amazing is the wrong word. It's, I guess, egregious. I have trouble with that word. Egregious. What happened in Cleveland that probably sparked, just like we had the Laquan case. Cleveland had many, but this one in Cleveland that I'll share with you is just, again, off the walls, off the charts, completely. So that's the aftermath of it all. Let's go to number 9. Now, this is back to the same data set with just 31 precincts and did the shootings. You see the headline, they're shooting fewer people. So I think that this actually reflects what I'm saying, that how the reforms are in fact having, the publicity is having an impact. But here's the important thing. Here's what I want to point out. And these are lethal, okay? These are the lethal ones here, fatal. And then you have non-fatal, and you have a few, which is kind of weird, actually. You have a few that are unknown. So how's that? Either you're dead or alive, I think. But wait, you know, what can I tell you? That's the quality of the data, that, you know, it's unknown. The guy's half dead. I don't know, walking around half dead or what. But more seriously, here it is here. The trend can be traced to a handful of large departments, including Philadelphia, Chicago, Las Vegas, that enacted reforms. In fact, 7 of the 10 cities with the largest reductions in police shootings had one thing in common, and that is the federal interventions, the ones I just showed you. Okay, those federal interventions. Now here's the kicker. The new Attorney General, Mr. Jefferson Davis, oops, I didn't mean that. Jefferson Sessions, not Davis. Sorry, I don't know why I'm thinking Jefferson Davis. Maybe it's because Dean Davis was sitting in the room. I don't know. Anyway, he says that he's withdrawing the program. He's going to pull it all back. He says, we have no business, the federal government has no business interfering with the states' police practices. However, when it comes to sanctuary cities, when it comes to marijuana, the feds are all over. He's telling the feds, go out there and bust everybody and give them as much time as you can. Something that the American public is already on record of opposing. He wants to roll it back. So it's okay to intervene when it's something he wants. But if it's something that the public wants, it's a different matter. So this is the kind of situation that we are facing. Now I think I'm going to introduce you to some people. And this is the sad part. This is where it starts to get sad. Tamir Rice. How many know about Tamir Rice? 12 years old. 12 years old. 12 years old, playing in a playground with a BB gun. Cop gets out of his car. Within 3 seconds, Tamir Rice is dead. Worst part, cop walks. Cop walks. This is Cleveland. Cop walks. Shouldn't have been hired, which is another thing I forgot to mention. Vetting. They don't vet. There's reasons for why they don't vet. Don't have time to go into them. All right? Tamarack should never have been killed. This is Walter Scott. I'm going to show you a little bit more about him in a minute. These people here, this is a couple, Melissa and Timothy. 137 bullets were shot into the car. We don't know what exactly Timmy had some kind of record or something, but I don't think he was necessarily doing anything. There's no report that he actually had done something, but he ran. It was a long speed chase, and when they finally stopped, the cops rained bullets in them. One guy, I think, how much was it, 39? How many bullets was that one guy? One guy, listen to this, one guy alone, 49 bullets he shot into the car. He stood on top of the hood and kept, and literally reloaded and kept shooting. They took 24 bullets out of Melissa when it was all over, and 23 bullets went into Timothy. And there were several other cops. They all walked. Every last one of them walked. Nothing. No misdemeanor cop out, nothing at all. They all walked. That's how Cleveland is. That's why I say this is 2012, and the Cleveland federal intervention, 2014, those things take time to get off the ground. So I'm pretty sure, even though I wasn't there, that this was pivotal to the intervention in Cleveland, just as Laquan McDonald was pivotal to the intervention in Chicago. Okay, let's wait. Let me introduce everyone else. Here's Laquan and John Crawford. John Crawford is another case. It's just mind-boggling. John Crawford was in a Walmart in Ohio, a Walmart, shopping, toys for a kid, toy gun, toy rifle. He's looking at a toy rifle. He's on the phone with the mom, his girlfriend, probably saying, hey, what do you think? Should I get him a rifle? Or whatever, you know? Cop comes in because a racist and a liar called the police, called 911 and said there's a man in Walmart pointing guns at people. And he did it on purpose, and he lied. He said he was a Marine vet. He wasn't a Marine vet. He got kicked him out of the Marines. He was a racist is what he was. But anyway, and there was some talk about charging him. I couldn't keep up with it. I don't think he ultimately got charged, but they did consider charging him with a crime. So when the cop gets there, he says, hey, put that gun down. He's got a cell phone in his ear. So he didn't hear the cop command. Shot him to death, just like that. No charges. No charges filed. Nothing. It's okay. That's Ohio for you. Stay the hell out of Ohio, man. How about you guys? Okay, we'll go to the next one. Now this is Philando Castile, Minneapolis. This is an egregious case. I mean, they're all egregious, but this one, you see the gun. That's the gun. He's being killed. His girlfriend's taping that. What happened is he gets pulled over for a bad tail light. Actually, more than a bad tail light in this case. This is why I say this guy epitomizes racism. It turns out that the cop claimed that they looked like a couple that had committed a robbery, which happened, I forgot how long ago, 2 weeks ago or something, 2 days ago, some time ago, and maybe 10 miles from here. And what was the identifying feature? Okay, he said the nose. Something about his nose was kind of broad. And I guess somehow they knew that the suspect also had a broad nose. Or maybe it was just that the suspect had black skin. Same color as Philando's skin. That's what I pretty much believe. This is a horrible, horrible picture. You need to see it. You need to feel it. Because I want you to feel it. When you leave here, I want you remember this, not as a lecture, but as an experience. Because that is what is going to stick to you. Next one, please. Okay, this is Walter Scott. This is Walter Scott being shot in the back. By the grace of God, we have this picture because it was a bystander who just happened to catch this. And he sat on it for 2 or 3 days, probably shaking the whole time, wondering, what should I do? What should I do? Afraid that if he came forward with it, something could happen to him too. Luckily, nothing did happen. Now, this guy got 20 years, finally. They tried him twice. He finally got 20 years. But here's why I say he epitomizes racism. When the jury came back, it was 11-1 conviction. The one juror, the holdout, you couldn't shake him. This is amazing what this guy said after. He said, I can never find a cop guilty of something like that. I won't do it. I can't do it. You know? There's supposed to be these questions you ask jurors before. I forgot the expression. Some kind of expression that they use where you can dismiss a juror. But they don't have a question for that. Are you willing to convict a police officer? Maybe if they had that question and he'd been honest, he would have been convicted in state court. He got 20 years. He didn't get 20 years in state court. He got 20 years for the feds. Feds charged him with the catch-all charge, which is violating civil rights of a person. And that's why I call that blue privilege, right? Because, hey, they defer to the people in blue like it was, you know, they're gods. Okay, next we're going to turn to Laquan. I'm well over, but I'm going to keep going until you stop me. All right? And let's begin with the city of Chicago. Here's the city of Chicago. These are shootings in the city of Chicago from 2000 to 2015. 215 people killed, 702 people non-fatally shot. Are some of those shootings and killings legitimate? Of course. How many? Unknown. Are there any illegitimate? You betcha. No one, not a single cop, was indicted. Notice Laquan was killed here in 14, at the end of 14, and I'll explain that in a minute, but he wasn't, the officer wasn't charged until the end of 2015. And I'll explain why in a minute. The next one. You probably heard the so-called bad apple thesis. The bad apple thesis, which isn't entirely bunk, okay? There's some truth to that. And let me just say, I meant to say this at the beginning. You know, this is not anti-police talk. And it's true. I believe it's true what they say, you know, that there's a lot of bad apples out there, but there's also a hell of a lot of good police officers that are decent people and do their jobs. And, you know, I'll tell you something. I just made fun of being pulled over, right, with a bad taillight. Here's a case that happened just a couple of days, well, maybe a month ago. Time goes too fast. A black woman driving a car, pulled over. Cop says, let me open your trunk. She opens the trunk. She's filming him, but he doesn't know it. So he fiddles around with the trunk, closes the trunk, says to her, okay, lady, have a nice day. Your tail light was out, but I fixed it. And he goes off. That's the kind of thing I like to see more of. And it went viral. It went viral. So I'm sure he got plenty of kudos for what he did. So yes, there are decent people out there. And I don't want to overdo it, skewing the other way. However, there's a catch. They say there's one bad apple, and then there's 99 good ones. Okay? It's more complicated than that. The so-called good ones, the ones that would never, ever take upon themselves to do something like what happened to Laquan, they do something else that's not good. They cover up for the bad apples. Big time. Big time. There's a caveat even to that, which is why I say there's layers of complexity. And the caveat to that is the cover-ups, they are not solely a matter of loyalty. Very often, the cover-ups are based on fear. Fear of retaliation. And I can show some dramatic evidence of fear of retaliation. But getting back to the apples, the numbers, that period, in 2006, there was about 13,500 police officers in the city of Chicago. More recently, it's been down to about 12.5. So let's say on average, maybe it's 13,000, excuse me. All right? Now, I don't know where your cutoff is. These are people who have complaints. Are some of the complaints frivolous? I bet you can count on that. Are they all frivolous? Hell no. Serious complaints, beatings, unwarranted intrusions into homes, shootings that weren't lethal or where they missed, etc. So how many complaints does it take for someone to be a bad apple? How about 50 plus? You got 2 bad apples. How about 40 plus? You got 17. If we just go with 30, now you got 46, 17, and 2, so you got about 60 something out of 12,000. We're already over the 1% of bad apples versus the 99%. And you can see if you just cut it off at 10, we're talking over 10%. All right? Well, I won't be that stringent. I'll stop here. 200. That's plenty. That's a lot. Nonetheless, let's go on to the next one because I'm out of time. This is just to show you. These 2 are police officers. And they did the right thing. They helped bring down, for the feds, one of the worst corrupt cops in the city of Chicago in the history. I mean, this guy was bad news. He was taking people off in the street, taking their dope, their money, forcing them to give tribute to dealers. Even apparently had at least one person hit, had named someone, and they took him out. It had a guy killed. I mean, that's how dirty this guy was. They ended up getting him on something much more minor than that, but these 2 were pivotal in getting him. They were treated like garbage by the cops. They sued. They were being treated so bad, they sued. They wore wires and stuff to prove, that they were being mistreated, and they won. They won a $2 million settlement. So that's how serious this stuff is. I haven't even gotten to Laquan, so we better move on ahead. And here's Laquan. Now, what I'm going to show you is not easy to look at, but let's do it. This is Laquan coming down the street. That's him being shot. 16 bullets. And the majority of the bullets were after he's lying down on the ground. How do we know that? We know that because they were witnesses. And they heard the shots. And they watched it go down. And worse, after 16 bullets, this guy went to reload and fire some more. His colleagues said, don't do that. And so he stopped. Now we come back to the good apple theory. So let me just tell you about the background of this. Laquan may have been rifling through some cars in a parking lot. He kept walking. Maybe the guy watching it was hollering at him, so he took off. He seemed to be high. Even the cops said that. And perhaps because he was high on something was why he wasn't complying. So the first cops on the scene, all they did was follow him. They tried to coax him into stopping. He wouldn't stop. They called not for reinforcements. They called for a taser. Because they didn't have a taser on them, and they figured, we're going to have to tase this guy because he ain't stopping. Okay, that's all they called for. A couple of cops came. The actual shooter jumps out of his car and starts firing almost immediately. And again, he may have hollered at the guy, one word or two, hey, stop, you. No? Okay, boom. 16 bullets, and ready to reload and shoot some more. Now, one thing I skipped over, sociological theory. I don't have time to go into it in depth, but it fits perfectly with so-called control theory. If you know control theory, there's a number of components of control theory, but the component that's most immediate to potential commission of deviance is outer controls. And the most important outer control, needless to say, is, am I going to get caught? That's an outer control. Another outer control is, who's going to know? Will they approve or will they disapprove? And so because there's a code of silence, you know that nobody's going to disapprove, in effect. Even if they disapprove inside, they're not going to disapprove. And believe me, what they did is mind-boggling. I mean, although these other cops were up to that point behaving what you might even call exemplary, doing good police work, as soon as the killing went down, it's like lockstep took over. And they immediately set up the cover-up. This happened in front of a Burger King. Been to that Burger King. It's a long story. But there's cameras at Burger King. It's like everywhere else on Earth. Nowadays, cameras everywhere. They went into the Burger King, demanded the cameras, and messed them up. Destroyed all the tapes. Little did they know, this is the funny part, while they were destroying the tapes of Laquan being shot, they were being taped. Because there's tapes in, in the Burger King, probably watching the employees. But that tape didn't surface for some time, but they eventually surfaced. And I saw that. And you see them right there screwing around with the other tapings. They browbeat witnesses. They took witnesses, the real witnesses, took them to the station, kept them for hours, browbeating them. Kept saying over and over again, no, the tapes don't show what you said. Getting them to change their stories or intimidating the hell out of them. Okay? And then they went forward with the fake story that Laquan was somehow menacing them with this knife he was carrying. And he was carrying a knife, a small little knife, probably, perhaps, to help him break into the cars that he was trying to rifle or something like that, which is not a good thing, but it's hardly capital punishment material. Not, okay? Not even close, not even a felony. Especially you don't catch him in the act. So the cover-up went so high. So many people saw that tape that belonged to the city. Cops, city manager, a whole bunch. It's, in fact, is all likelihood, Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, probably saw the tape too. Of course, he's never going to say he did. Okay, the chief of police clearly did. He was fired. He tried to immediately, cut ties to the people who sat on this and fired the chief of police. And what happened is they sat on the tape for the 13 months. This cop went on his, every day like there was nothing had happened. It was all business as usual for 13 months. But during that time, things started coming out. One informant was a police officer, called anonymously and said, hey, look, you got to look into this, there were a couple of others. One other person that was one of the browbeat witnesses got hold of people and started talking. And then there were a number of Freedom of Information Act was, by the way, to try to obtain data from the police. It's like trying to get blood from a rock. Because these people are very, very tight-fisted with their stuff. But a number of Freedom of Information Acts finally produced first the autopsy and then eventually the tape. When the tape came out, the day before, the guy is indicted for murder. There had been no tape, no indictment. And once the tape got out, that's it. All hell broke loose. And some of that hell breaking loose, of course, was very positive because it generated the reforms that we're seeing. My final, and I'm over, you got a few minutes to grill me, is to say the following. It doesn't have to be this way. We can make it better. And I'm going to show you a dramatic picture. This is my favorite of all the pictures I have that I've taken from different media sources. This is Black Lives Matter in Wichita, Kansas at a picnic. And there's more pictures. It's amazing. We can go to picnics with police instead of going to funerals because of the police. If we can fix this thing, and we can do this. I'll stop right there.
We have a little time for questions, so if you have something you'd like to ask.
Yes.
is this ever really going to fully get better? I look at some of my students, especially students from suburban and rural areas. They're terrified of black men. And I think it's from everything from they've heard from their parents or images in the media. I think we way too comfortably throw the word thug around, which has become the polite N-word of the 21st century. And so I just see it even in students here. They've got this, we socially constructed black men as dangerous and scary.
Okay, let me tell you something that was popularized during the civil rights era, and that was this. It doesn't matter what's in the hearts of those white men in the South. What matters is that they obey the law. If they obey the law, they can hate me till the day I die. But they better obey the damn law, or they're going to pay. And if you can do that, you can achieve a lot. Yes?
This is hard for me, but many of you know I have a Hispanic son. And we moved here from Mississippi thinking that there would be less discrimination. You were at Mississippi State, and we moved here thinking we'll get back to the Midwest. It isn't. He can't go in the fashion mall. He's kicked out. If he goes out with his fraternity brothers and they leave a bar, all of them can go. He's put on the ground, and the police officer's foot is put in his back. I could go on and tell you about Indianapolis and the experiences he's had here, and they're just as bad as they were in Mississippi.
What I will simply say is that it was worse, and it's better now. The reports of driving while black that I used to get a lot of, they've really dwindled. Carmel has changed as well. But there's going to be cops like that. And again, what we need is for these people to obey the law, and people have to enforce the law. So the supervisory personnel. But these cameras matter. These cameras are having an impact. It's true that you can manipulate the cameras too. A lot of times they turn off the cameras. They turn them on after the shooting, or they turn off the voice. In the case of Laquan McDonald, the reason that tape did not have volume was because they had taken the batteries out and put them in upside down. So, it wasn't working. And there's all kinds of excuses. And let me tell you, these guys, they don't want to wear the cameras, okay? In Boston, when they were first the pilot for the cameras in Boston, they asked for volunteers. Guess how many volunteers they got? 0 volunteers, all right? So, but I'll tell you one area where a lot of probably police officers, but I'm going to say supervisory people, or at least spokespersons, actually desire something that's consistent with what I would like to see. So they are not crazy about the fact that everybody's armed. They don't buy into that good guy with a gun thesis that's going to somehow prevent crimes. They would like to see less people with guns, not more. And that's one area where we can immediately line up behind it. But of course, they won't take on the NRA. Because the NRA...
My point is there's a lot of discrimination here that isn't recognized. He can't go into a Cracker Barrel. No one will take his order. He has friends who say, I'm sorry, I can't go out with you tonight because my girlfriend will be with us and she won't sit next to you and she won't talk to you. I mean, this is Indianapolis that we're experiencing.
Yes, I'm sorry. Let me just say, I don't know how to respond to that, but thank you for... Go ahead.
Just to piggyback on her comments, has there been any examination of how this may be, I wonder, is there a shift towards this behavior maybe being more toward Latino people? Is there any, looking at the statistics,
Yes,
Latino versus Black?
yeah, sure. The trend is, and it's actually straightforward. Where there's Latinos, it trends to them. So, for example, Indianapolis, as I said, prior to the 1990s, Latinos were quite rare. They were here, but not many. But in 1990s, we had the influx. And immediately, you start having problems. when there were large numbers of them. A good example is this Frankfurt, I think, up north, where there's a meat factory that hired a lot of the immigrants. The meat factories, those who know about it, they're big time on bringing in immigrants. And there were all kinds of fights and stabbings, in the first early years. Things seem to have quieted down after a while. And I haven't been to Frankfurt, but I've had students that remember that because they were there growing up when this stuff was happening. So the answer to your question, if there's enough Latinos, especially recent influxes, there's probably going to be issues.
Well, I guess my question is the statistical occurrence trending up? You said with African Americans, it may be trending down slightly, but I wonder if it's just going to trend up with Latinos instead.
That's a very good question, and I think you have to remember that Latinos are somewhat more varied. I mean, internally, you have all the different nationalities. They have very different, in some cases, settlement patterns. Some Latinos, in fact, this is a problem with the statistics, can be statistically thrown into the section of whites. There's such a thing as like white Latinos, and I'm trying to think of one. Myself, for instance, I can pass for white, but I am Latino and quite proud to be Puerto Rican. Other comments, questions? Do I have to bribe you to ask? Hey, there's one. Yes.
No, I was just going to say, well, I do want to be respectful of people's time. Well, one more question.
There's one behind you.
Sorry.
So regarding the NRA and the fact that there have been multiple school shootings alone as in February, what about the gun safety rights and the amount of gun laws allowed, period? Because some of them just go in easily and buy one, but even if they don't, about some cases, well, it's like you said earlier, so when we think of something, what about that? Because that's also a factor in how we have the safety and the laws that go against us in the stand our ground, which was in Florida for another case, I remember, somewhat.
You are correct, of course, that there's more to than just the prevalence of guns. There's the laws like stand your ground. And believe me, I oppose stand your ground laws. I'm not sure if some of those same spokespersons I mentioned before who do oppose the idea of everyone being armed to the teeth would probably single out stand your ground. Chances are they would. Because the thing is, especially if you're a police chief, the last thing you want is murder rates to go up, even if they're so-called justifiable homicides. You got to deal with all that stuff. You got to deal with that publicity. I mean, Rahm Emanuel, I'm sure, was scared to death that he was going to be put out of office. And he was very, very lucky that he managed to weather the Laquan McDonald tragedy. Very, very fortunate. So yes, of course, all those things matter. As I said, there's a zillion factors involved in this madness. Zillion factors, and that's one or two of them right there that you mentioned. Did I answer your question? Okay, good. Was there another one that you recognize, Stephen?
Not. Let's give Dr. Aponte